Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Bruce Carroll. Bruce, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
I live in Memphis, Tennessee, actually Cordova, Tennessee, right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And I am a husband and father and grandfather. And I love the Lord Jesus. I came to Christ in 1979. So I'm a follower of Christ. And I've been called to be a singer, songwriter, and communicator of the gospel through music. And I'm also a worship leader, have been a director of worship for many years. And I get up every morning, thank the Lord that I'm on this side of the dirt, and then get into whatever assignment he has for me. Like today, I have an assignment with you guys. This is awesome.
For people that are interested in finding out more about your music, I encourage them, go check out your music. Where can they do that?
They can go to brucecarroll.com, or you can go to Spotify or iTunes, YouTube. I've got tons of videos and tons of records and songs. So yeah, check it out. Okay.
And I'll put those links in the description box. So for people listening, you can go straight there and they'll be ready for you to go and find out more. Now, Bruce, you're a Grammy, Dove award-winning worship leader, musician. I want to go back to the beginning,
Okay.
and we'll come to today later. But when did you start getting involved with music, and when was it that you realized this is actually what you were called to do?
I was raised in a musical family, a very dysfunctional but musical family, and my older brothers played acoustic guitars and sang, and my sister sang, and my mom played piano, and my dad sang. He was in vaudeville, excuse me, for years. So I always remember music being played in the house, and I got my first acoustic when I was about 10 years old. Yeah, 10 or 11. And, there was a big folk movement when I was a kid at that age. People like Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul, and Mary, the New Christy Minstrels. And so I had an opportunity to go to see Peter, Paul, and Mary in concert. My sister took me, and we were on about the fifth row, and it was an epiphany. I mean, I sat there and watched what they did, and I was moved. I was not at the time, later on, looking back on it, I laughed, I cried, and I was so struck by the power of what they were doing that when I got home, I wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to. I wanted to get up in front of people and sing songs. Now, I was not raised in a Christian home, so God was really not in any of the equation as far as I knew. So, but I was compelled to really start to work on the acoustic and learn chords and learn songs. And that's where it all started. And ironically, many years later, I was in the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, and I just won my second Grammy. And I saw Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary crossing the foyer. And so I stopped him and I said, Peter, you have to know this. I just won a Grammy, but I want you to know that one of the reasons why I'm here and why that even happened was because you did and have been doing what you have been doing faithfully for so many years. You impressed me as a little boy to be a changer of the world through music, and I want to thank you for it. And then about 3 years after that, I was invited to the Special Olympics to sing a song that I wrote, and Peter, Paul, and Mary were there. So I was at a press conference with Peter again, and so I sang this song, and he was so impressed by it. In fact, he cried at the press conference, and he said, "You have to come and sing that song for the other two, for Paul and Mary and Sergeant Shriver." And I said, "Okay." So I got to spend about 3.5 hours backstage with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and I got to sing them the song, and I got to talk to all of them and get to know them and let them know what an influence in my life they had been. So that was a cool thing. But yeah, so I wanted to be a singer-songwriter from the time I was about 11, inspired by Peter, Paul, and Mary. And then of course the Beatles hit. And I don't know. Here, I'm gonna do something really weird. I don't know how many podcasts have done this, but see, I'm like a Beatles fan.
Yeah.
That's the Beatles drum head, and then I've got I got stuff like that.
Yeah.
All the Beatles memorabilia.
Right. I mean, like, I don't worship the Beatles, and they aren't my idols, but they are a huge musical influence because of the excellence in songwriting and production that they brought.
I just want to jump in with one thing before it passes by. I'm thinking what a profound thing it was that you went out of your way to thank them for the influence that they'd have in your lives. You went out of your way to stop them and say, "I want to tell you."
Giving honour to those that have gone before you and inspired you.
Yeah. And I don't want that to pass, because I think it's something that is sadly lacking so often. And how powerful it is to people when we do stop and thank them for the influence they've had in our lives.
Giving people roses now. Often we give it to them after they've died.
Well, I hadn't quite gone to that place, but yeah. But
right.
I just wanted to pick that up before we shot on too far past.
Well, thank you. And it's just something that I didn't really think much about doing, because it was such a natural thing, and like, maybe it's my age, maybe it's the culture in which I was raised. And that's a really good point. And it is something that when I'm out doing some church consultant work and I'm working with worship teams, worship leaders, and I have a heart to train, equip, and mentor people like that, I always bring that up, that I mean, like, generally I'm working with people younger than myself, but I do make it a point for them to understand that they are standing on the shoulders of somebody else and doing what they're doing because somebody else did it before they did. And, they need to have honor and respect for those that came before and gave them an opportunity to be who they are. That's important.
We take people, when we have mission teams come to the UK, we like them to get a feel of the nation. I think too often missions is all about building a house instead of understanding the nation. And we take them to some of the old cathedrals with the stained glass window and the pews and the kneelers. And you can almost feel them looking round and rolling their eyes like, "Oh yeah, this is religious." And we get them to close their eyes, stand there and close their eyes, and we say to them, "You have what you have today because you are standing on the foundations of these generations past, many of whom gave their lives." And to really appreciate that, I think probably with worship, with music, there is often a sense of judgment of the past. And there can be a sense of judgment for the future as well. I mean, music separates generations. So, yeah, we're right along with you with that. The shoulders of one generation, the floor of one generation should be the ceiling of the next. Yeah.
And I mean, it's, plus it's a biblical deal. And You talk about the younger generation, who I happen to love, as difficult at times as it is to feel like I'm really communicating and getting through. Um, but one particular one particular person, we went out to eat, and I was having a hard time understanding why this person gave no deference to, or seemed to have a very difficult time working with anyone older than him. And I mean, this is really weird and random, but go with me on this. So we went out to lunch, and he started talking about, how the earth was flat. I don't know if you know any flat earthers. I don't happen to believe that at all. And I don't even know what to say to people that believe that. Um, it's just insane. But
I mean, the flat Earth thing doesn't really make sense anyway. We've got mountains and stuff. The Earth isn't flat anyway, so you know.
Well, we've been travelling for 30 years and we haven't fallen off the edge yet. We've been to 14 nations,
right.
so, you can use that as evidence if you like.
Right. Well, and so I didn't even know what to say. I mean, like, that's so asinine that I just looked at him. But when he started, you know, saying, well, like all the rockets that supposedly went into space, that's all fake, and we didn't go to the moon, we didn't land on the moon, and so that's when I started to get, my ire got up, because I remember going, NASA and the concentrated effort to get to the moon and back, and all the people that sacrificed and the lives that were lost, and just the pride of the country and everybody working in the same direction, and to discount all of that sacrifice and all the technology that came as a result of that happening, and on and on and on. It really hacked me off. So I don't work with that guy anymore. There's just some people you can't work with.
By the way, before we carry on, just to correct our quote earlier on, it's something we say all the time. It's not the floor, it's the ceiling. The ceiling of one generation is the floor of the next. And then we say, how high is your ceiling and who are you putting on it?
Yeah, well,
just to correct ourselves from earlier. We only say it all over the world and we got it wrong. So
I just said it to see whether you would pick it up.
Oh yeah, no.
Well done, you did.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm glad I went back and correct that. It was eating away at me.
Yeah. Get back.
If we carry on like this, I'm going to have to stop working with you. So
okay.
Going back to some of your journey, what would you say was the major break for you, which took you from just dreaming about doing this thing to actually being able to do it full time?
Okay, so I worked hard, and I got to be a pretty good acoustic player by the time I was 13, 14 years old. And when I was in high school, I would play at dances, and I'd play around campfires, and I'd do James Taylor songs, and like, it was great to be an acoustic player as opposed to an electric player, because you had to take an amp and cables, you had to have power and all that. And acoustic, I could just take it to the campfire and sing to the girls, and which is really what my whole motivation was to get people to like me and to get girls to like my voice and let me woo them with my James Taylor songs. But I came to the point to where I got to be skillful enough to where I started to play cover songs in some local clubs and pubs and bars and stuff, and put a band together, worked with a couple other guys. We had a trio for a while and a duo for a while. And so I was actually, by the time I was 15, working around San Antonio, making money. I dropped out of high school and sort of devoted all of my time to being a singer-songwriter, even though I wasn't really writing any songs. I was just singing everybody else's. And so me and this guy and this girl, we got some attention from a couple of record labels, and we had an opportunity to sign with a label called Elektra, but I so disdained the girl that was in this trio that I didn't sign, which, like in hindsight, it was the right thing. But, but I was a kid and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have any direction. I didn't know the Lord. I didn't even know God existed. Really didn't think a whole lot about him most of the time, unless I was in trouble, which I got into quite a bit. Because in high school, it was, the age of turn on, tune in, drop out kind of generation. So, I dropped a lot of acid, smoked a lot of pot, drank a whole lot of everything that was available, behaved badly. But musically, I was doing what I wanted to do. And it got to the point to where I was playing out just about every weekend, and that's how it started. And so I moved from the Central Texas area to Denver, Colorado, and tried to do the same thing there, and was pretty successful at it. And I got into some trouble with drugs. I got arrested a couple times because I drank too much and got in fights, and that was just part of the process of God waking me up. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that one's life isn't working. And so, I was making a living and I was singing other people's songs, but my life was a mess. My personal life was just a wreck. And so, but God used that, and my older brother, who got saved, who came to Christ in 1978. He went on a mission to get me saved. And so he was highly instrumental in calling me and sharing Christ. And eventually in 1979 I gave my life to Jesus by myself in my bedroom in Denver, Colorado, and nothing's been the same since. And the trajectory of my life changed. I got out of music. I stopped doing it because I didn't want to go back and do what I was doing. I didn't want to be in the clubs and the bars anymore at that time, because I didn't want to drink and do drugs, frankly. And so I started to get odd jobs, and I didn't think music was going to be part of my life anymore. Sold all of my gear. I sold my guitars and all my equipment. And so, fortunately, I got plugged into a church. This is crazy. I'm gonna have to tell you how this works. So my older brother, Milton, led me to the Lord, told me what I needed to do to be saved. He didn't lead me to the Lord, but he told me how to do it. And so I did it on my own. And shortly after that happened, he came to town, and he was eating with our older brother, who has since passed. But so Milton went from me to his older brother, our oldest brother, to try to get him to Christ. So he's at a restaurant in Denver, Colorado called Lau Alzado's, who's an ex-football player, an all-pro guy. He owned the restaurant, and he was witnessing to Billy. Milton was witnessing to Billy, our oldest brother. And Billy said to Milton, "Well, you talk like there's Christians everywhere." And Milton said, "There are Christians everywhere." And at that time, a girl named Nikki Barker skated up. She was a roller skating waitress in this restaurant. Everybody had to, have a shtick. And so hers was, was this roller skating waitress, beautiful girl. She skated up, and Billy said, "Excuse me, are you a Christian?" And she said, "Well, yes, I am." Which was, kind of funny. And anyway, Milton and her got to talking, and he said, "Hey, my little brother just came to Christ. Do you know a good church?" And she said, yes, my church is a good church. So he said, well, I'm going to send my little brother there. His name is Bruce. So I started going to that church, and I met this girl, Nikki, who eventually became my wife. And she's the one that turned me on to Christian music, because when I started going to this church and I met her, she didn't know I had anything to do with music, and we started to kind of date a little bit. So I had known her for about 2 months, and I was over at her house, and I saw an old K acoustic guitar, kind of cheap, sitting behind a chair. And I said, oh, a guitar. Do you play? And she said, I know a few chords. She said, do you play? And I said, a little bit. So I played and sang this song, and her jaw dropped. And the first thing that she said was, God's going to do something big with you. And I said, well, how's that work? I mean, I don't like, how can he do something big with me in music? I used to be in music, and I didn't know that there was Christian music, is what I'm saying. And she said, oh yeah, there's like Christian music. Don't you know that? And I said, no. I'm like probably 5-6 months old in the Lord. And she got saved in 1974. So she's older than I am in the Lord. But so like she turned me on to these albums, and Phil Keaggy and BJ Thomas and all these Christian records. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. So I could write Christian songs and do music again, but for him. And she said, yeah. So that was kind of the start of me wanting to get back into music. She actually bought me a guitar because I didn't have the money. And then I chased her for 1.5 years, and she eventually surrendered. And her and I wed in 1982. And so she's been a huge support and has encouraged me in my musical gift. And I wouldn't have done any of that. Probably would not have pursued a record deal and a publishing deal in Nashville had she not pushed me to do that.
But it's eye-opening when we listen to somebody say the things that you've just said, because when people come to know the Lord and they have no, in inverted commas, church background, we make a lot of assumptions about what they know, the culture of the church, etc., etc. And hearing you say, I didn't even know there was Christian music, should be a wake-up call that we need to. I think we just get complacent in our Christianese instead of getting out and saying, actually, we've got to enter your culture in order that we can understand how to walk with you into the life of the kingdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and so it was a journey. Obviously, I had to grow in the Lord too, I couldn't just jump right into writing songs. Plus, there's a way, it's a craft. It's an art form, and so I didn't know a whole lot about writing songs in the first place that were any good anyway. But more than that, I didn't know what to write because I didn't know the Lord well enough to even articulate what was going on. I was a brand new believer. I didn't know anything. Some days I feel like I still don't know anything, and it's 30 something years. And, because there's so much to the Lord, there's so much in the Word, there's so many facets and depths in the relationship that we have with Christ. But Nikki was very good. And these guys that were discipling me, what a blessing that was. If I didn't have these men that were going out of their way to make sure, holding me accountable and taking me to Bible studies and, for the next 5 years, calling me and checking up on me and, challenging me to, study to show myself approved and to know why I believe what I believe, So all of that work towards the culmination of, I started to write some songs, and I started to sing in some local area churches. I was scared to death when I first started because I felt this combination of, I am so not worthy to do this, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll get out there and and just lay out the relationship that I have through these little songs that I wrote, and people started to like them. And so I was affirmed over and over again, and that's when Nikki and I felt like we were supposed to move from Texas to Nashville.
So what was the first song you wrote, and why did you write that one?
Well, the first song I wrote as a believer, you mean? Yeah, it was a song called Spinning. I was spinning around in circles, not knowing where or how to go. Is how it starts, and desperation starting to show, balancing on life's tight wire, no net below to break my fall, wanting to pick the phone up but not knowing who to call. I mean, just a simple little song like that. And then the chorus is, Lord, my creator, I called out to you and you were there to answer my plea. Something like, I know I can't repay the many things you have done. I thank you every day for choosing me, I think is. And so that was the first song. And I went into the studio and demoed it. And I was singing in these little concerts that I was doing. And I just kept writing. And so, Nikki and I really felt like that was what the Lord wanted me to do. And her being a support, like just unbelievable helpmate, she said, yeah, let's move to Nashville. And so we did, and we slept on the floor of my brother's for about 4 months, me and her, and we had 3 kids at the time. And and so I worked as a welder until 2:00 in the afternoon. And then I went down to Music Row and started writing with anybody that wanted to write with me. And I met some people who knew some people who knew some other people. And, relationships are everything. And so I ended up signing a publishing deal and doing a demo. And I met a songwriter who had a record deal, who was looking for a song, and I gave her a song, and she was playing it for Word Records, and they said, oh yeah, we really love that song, but who's that guy singing it? She said, this guy named Bruce Carroll. And they said, does he have any more songs? And she said, oh yeah, he's got a bunch. And so she took my tape in, I think the next day, and I got a call from the president of the company later that week, and they said, hey, would you be interested in coming and talking to us about a record deal? I said, sure. And so I went in, and they said, man, we really love the song that Terry Gibbs is going to cut, but we also love all these other songs of yours. So how about you sign with us and we put it out? And that's that's what happened. So I signed with Word Records, I think in about 1980, 87, 86, 87, and released my first, which was 10 demos. They went on ahead and put it out. And then from there is when it started. And I made, I think, 8 records with them, and won some Grammys, won some Doves, traveled the world, got in front of a whole lot of people, and it was just a beautiful time. And Nikki and I got to see the fruit of the vision that God had called us both into.
At the beginning, you were saying about how your motivation was kind of a Beatles will lead me to the light. That if I play this music, the people will be interested in me, and so it was more of a pursuit of people liking you and of a fame, if you like. You got saved, you then start doing Christian music. In your journey as a successful worship leader, what are some lessons learned? Did some of those old motivations come back? I know what it can be like when you're put onto a platform and all these people are looking at you and singing your songs, you know, some of the things that it can do with your ego. Did some of those old tendencies come back? Were there other things that maybe you struggled with along that journey that you had to learn lessons about? Can you talk a bit about some of that? And then I want to talk to you a bit about the current worship music industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. I struggled with all of that. You know, it's such an interesting thing that happens. There are so many artists, you know. I think that the creatives are, you know, by and large insecure. And I mean, I know that I had this gift, but I wanted to use it to manipulate people into liking me. Because I didn't know how fully loved I was already. So there's a death that has to occur. And in my case, it happened more than a few times. God gives us this gift, but it's his gift, and he gives it to us to use in a particular way and for a particular reason. And I know that I had to be willing to let all that go. I had to be willing, as a believer, as a follower of Christ and in personal relationship with him, I had to be willing to say, I don't care if I ever do this. I just want to do what you want me to do. And that's not an easy thing, but yet it's a requirement. And, you know, many singer-songwriters that have come to faith have said the same thing. You know, getting up on stage is a tricky deal. And if we're not up there for the right reason, you know, seeking to please an audience of one, then, you know, God is going to deal with that. And so, you know, it's just one of those things. When I first started, I wanted people to love me, and I was conscious of that. But then after I came to Christ, I just wanted to do everything that would please him, not to make him love me any more than he already did, but just because he deserves everything that I've got and that I am, and I love him for what he's done. So, so along that process, you know, and then I didn't care if I was going to ever do music again. And Nikki discovered I knew how to do music, and she pushed me and encouraged me to do it. So I did it because I have the gift to do it. But all along the way, the Lord checked me, and he would bring people into my life to speak into my life. Like, I remember one particular situation when I'd just been nominated for a Grammy, and I didn't even know how that worked. You know, I mean, how does that even happen? But, you know, the record label called and said, hey, you've been nominated for Grammy. It's in New York City, and, you know, congratulations, and you're going to go, and we're going to pay your way and stuff. So I had this buddy of mine who was my worship leader mentor at the time, a guy named Don Potter, a wonderful guy who you should interview sometime. He came over, and I was struggling with it, you know, and I said, Don, should I go and do this? I mean, I don't write these songs. I don't make these records. I don't get in front of people. I don't aspire to win Grammys, but I'm nominated for it. He said, look, your peers are saying you've done a good job. They want to give you a pat on the back. That's all this is. So just go. It's paid for. Have a good time. Enjoy it. But yeah, don't make a big deal out of it, because it's not. It's just not a big deal. He said a bigger deal is this. You're gonna probably win it because the album is great. And that's going to open up all kinds of avenues for you to be able to go out and minister and sing to the world. Remember this. If you're out there winning souls and you're doing your songs, and you come home and your wife is is resentful, your kids are rebellious, and your grass is a foot high, then you're probably not doing the work of the Lord. You got to make your family first. You got to take care of what God has called you to take care of first, and then that other stuff, that gift that God has given you to be able to do, just take all that with a grain of salt, because it's not about you, it's about what He's doing through you anyway, and then just come home and take care of business. And so, those are the kinds of people that God brought into my life to speak those kinds of things into me, to keep me grounded. But I will say that, when the Grammys were coming and the Doves were coming, and I was flying every week and getting in front of big crowds and making a lot of money, it was easy to believe my press and to think that I was something, and there were times when I didn't handle that very well, but God was always faithful to, either with my wife, who is amazing at being able to keep me grounded. He would use her in a mighty way, and and other folks. So I was able to navigate that, and come out on the other side, pretty intact. And I didn't fail like so many others did, and I certainly could have.
I just want to pick on, before Andrew you move it on. There are three words you mentioned that I think are very lacking in people in general, Christians in general, and especially with people on the platform. I don't want to judge the rest of the world, but I see it and see it. You said you were mentored. You said you were discipled. You said there were people that spoke into your life, and you listened to your wife. And I think those are such keys that, I, for one, am very, very strong on this, because they hold your character in place. And one of the things I say is that your character can bring you down. So, let's focus on your character, and your gifting will then shine. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think, from my perspective, they are huge in you going along the journey. The other thing is that I think sometimes people see worship leaders like yourself and they think they can just go out and it will all happen. But you talked about how you slept on the floor and how you had to move, and the whole path that led you to there demanded sacrifice and hard work. Even, I think you said at 13 you practiced hard. So I just wanted to pick those things up, because I think those can all get very lost on the journey if we're not careful.
Yeah, so it's such an interesting dance, life is. Anything we do, we have to do with all of our heart for the glory of God. And, playing and singing skillfully, or doing whatever we do, it needs to be done skillfully. So that takes work. It just doesn't happen. I believe that I'm naturally gifted and inclined to be a good acoustic player. So that comes easier for me than it does a lot of other people that I know. They have to work harder at it to do what I do. That just comes naturally. I used to play with a guy he would just get infuriated because I could just phone it in, and, he'd have to do scales and work hours a day, and I didn't have to do that. But relative to after we come to Christ, there's a mandate and a standard that we have to abide by. And so that's one of the things. Whatever we do, we have to work hard in order to be the best at it. And we should all, as believers, have a very strong work ethic, because if we're working, that's what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
So we should do it the best we can. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I want us to talk a bit now, as we come towards the end of this episode, about your heart for mentoring and raising up the next generation of worship leaders, people involved with the Christian music industry. We're seeing a lot, especially over the last few years, of very well-known Christian worship leaders, people involved with very well-known Christian bands that are now walking away from the faith. And ultimately, our faith is down to us. We should be responsible for developing our faith and going deeper in it. Would you say that's primarily the issue that we're seeing with a lot of these well-known Christian worship leaders walking away from the faith? Or would you say there's something about the Christian music industry which also helps to foster this happening?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of that. And I think it goes back to what Daphne said about the mentoring and the discipleship and the accountability. I mean, when I traveled, I always traveled with somebody, because I didn't want to be out there by myself. Not because I was afraid of something I would do, even though, hey, bad stuff can happen to anybody. But I didn't want to be out there and somebody be able to say something about me that wasn't true. So I always, traveled with my wife or with a road manager, or, somebody was always with me, is what I'm saying. And so to take that into our daily Christian walk, I think it's really important that we do not forsake the assembling together, that we're in a community, that we have people that know us, that can speak into our lives, that can sharpen us, that can also say, hey, what you're thinking is whacked, and it's not in the Bible, and this interpretation that you've got is crazy, and I see you as being arm of the flesh motivated. Those kinds of things are hard, but I've always had people in my life that have kind of kept me on the saddle and have said the hard things. And so in part, I think that some of these worship leaders, the industry sort of breeds competition. It breeds celebrity. And it's easy to get wrapped up in that. So once we get to thinking that we're bigger and more important than we are, and God really needs us, then we start to act crazy. And if we don't have people that are speaking into our lives to say, hey, are you out of your mind? Why are you doing this? Why are you believing that? Then, so to have those mechanisms in place as a worship leader, as anybody up in front of people with any kind of notoriety, is essential. It's critical.
When we were with you in Memphis, in our conversation, you were talking about your heart for mentoring and helping the next generation. As you've engaged with younger people within that industry, have they been open to that kind of thing, to having an older generation pouring into them, or have you found more people being resistant to it?
Some have been open, some haven't. I generally, when I'm having an opportunity to speak into a team or some worship leaders, it has been as a result of an invitation of the leadership of the church, either to raise the bar of quality and skill, or to maybe transition through a difficult time. Maybe they're having some issues with behavior with the worship leader, or maybe the worship leader is just sort of inherited the job, and he or she is really, struggling. They've got the calling and the talent to do it, but they just need to be helped. They need to be mentored and discipled. So, but in all those scenarios, mostly by the time I get there, they're open to me speaking into their lives, because it's kind of been told to them, hey, here's what has to happen. So there's some that are doing it because the senior pastor or the leadership says it has to be done, and they're kind of open. But I can tell that there's times when, oh, here's this older guy and he can't possibly know as much as we do about what's, really current and hip and where this church is going or whatever. So I get that some of the time, but mostly I deal with younger people that are open and wanting to know more about what I've got to say.
So, what are your feeling towards Christian music in 2021? And there's so many forms of it. If I look back over the years, it kind of worship music seemed to go through seasons. In the 1960s, there was the worship to scripture, and then you go all the way through. And I think back, it wasn't so long ago that Christian hip hop came on the scene, which I do call worship. And so it goes through seasons. How have you navigated those seasons, or how do you look at those seasons? I mean, if you go right back, there was William Booth going into the pubs and picking up secular tunes, and worship came. So it goes on a journey. How have you navigated that, and how do you navigate that personally, if not by worshipping in that way yourself, but in attitude and the way you relate to it?
Yeah, so when I was on full-time church staff, which I'm not now, and don't know that I'll ever really want to do that again. I mean, I'm open to it, whatever the Lord wants and whatever situation he wants to drop me in, I'm happy to do. But I was doing full-time church work for a total of about 20 years. And when I was doing that, I was listening to new music every week because I wanted to know what was happening out there. And, but since I've been out of a full-time thing for, I've been back to a full-time thing a couple years until November of last year. I was out at a church and I was out there pretty much full time, but I wasn't really listening to as much music as I was back then, because I read the congregation and I know so many songs from so many decades, and I still listen to a little bit. I don't listen to as much worship songs as I used to, mainly because I don't have the time. And a lot of where the mainstream worship is, I don't particularly like myself. And that's not a style statement. I like all styles. I'm a very musically very eclectic guy. And I love and I can appreciate anything that's done really well for the right reason. And, God uses all kinds of styles, reggae and, rock and roll, Christian hard rock, like I know the Petra guys, I was just with them yesterday. I know Michael Sweet from Striper, and, that's not necessarily something that I'd get up and do, but they do it so well, and they've got such a heart and a passion behind it. So I can actually listen to it and enjoy it. But I don't listen to a whole lot of the mainstream Christian stuff because I don't like the repetition. I don't like the shallowness of it. And, I sound very judgmental, and I'm not indicting all of it. I'm just saying a lot of it is just not my cup of tea. And, and I don't want to pick on a particular song. There is one out there called Reckless Love, and, it speaks of how God's love is reckless, and that is so not true. And I'm not going to sing a song called Reckless Love because there's nothing reckless about God, and there's nothing reckless about his love. Like if you go with the true meaning, as a songwriter, I get it. They're trying to come up with something, a new way to say something, but So
Yeah.
there's songs that I just cringe, when I hear like, that's not even true.
Yeah, there are certain songs where we'll be in a church and they'll be playing some music and everyone's singing along, and we'll be reading the words, and it will get to certain parts and we'll just stop singing.
Yeah.
And then we'll start singing a little bit later in the song. I know a couple churches that we've been to where if they want to use a new worship song in the church, then the senior pastor has to vet it and give permission for it to be used, so he can check the theology behind the lyrics.
Right.
So completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, but see, why should the senior pastor have to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, the worship leader should do that.
Exactly.
And so when I go in and speak to a team or consult in a particular situation, I mandate that, or I just encourage that the worship director, the guy who's calling the shots, is so in tune with the pastor and his heart, but more than that, knows the word of God enough to know when something's not doctrinally right. And then that frees the pastor up to go and be more about what God's calling him to do, instead of, watchdog worrying about whether or not his worship leader is going to do a song that's whacked.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go down a whole avenue on this one, because it is something that we have a real eye for, the theology behind songs. And I'll just throw in this statement, which is like throwing a stone into a pond, I think, at the minute. But Christmas songs, the theology that is so off whack on Christmas songs, I sometimes find it hard to sing one that I know is theologically and even geographically and all the rest of it correct. Yeah. So, yeah,
don't ruin Christmas for everyone.
No, I'll stop there. But there's another one which I will mention. That everybody, it's an old one, but it's still sung today. Let the weak say I am strong. Let the poor say I am rich. I go, do you realise where that was sung? It's when the armies are coming down Armageddon towards Jerusalem, and Jesus is challenging them. They say, you think you're strong, you're not, you're weak. It's flipping the whole thing over. And so, yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, because we all ought to have an eye for what's coming out of our mouths. So I have taken that in another direction now, haven't I?
Yeah, well, like you said, we could go off on
that
on a whole other tangent here, which it could be a whole other episode. But yeah, Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. For people listening, if you are involved in the Christian music industry, but even outside of that, there's a lot of really good principles here, generally speaking, for everyone. So go on, you want to say something?
I was just going to say, so maybe Bruce can just finish it off. If there are younger worship leaders listening right now, and you have 2 minutes to say something to them, what would you say?
Wow. Okay. I would start, and being a worship leader, speaking to another worship leader, let me just say, it's not about us. It's all about him. Our responsibility is to know him and love him and serve him, to know God's word, to do what we do to the best of our ability, skillfully work on our craft and our art that he has given us to glorify him with. But then loving on people, loving the Lord first, and then loving on people, because it's all about relationships. God cares more about that than anything, relative to our teams and the people that he's put in our charge or as shepherd over. And so love people as Jesus has loved us, and do what we do skillfully to glorify the Lord. When we worship to the audience of one, and rest in who we are in Christ and who he is in us.
Bruce, thank you Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back again. And we're going to have your wife on as well at some point. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.
Oh, thank you guys. We sure love you guys. And anytime, and stay in touch. And, the Hotel Carroll is open, so like if you're back in Memphis anytime soon, base out of here, we got a couple rooms for you, and we'll keep the bathroom clean and the refrigerator stocked.
Well, what more can you ask for?
Well, I don't know, but he's just publicised that over how many nations?
Yeah, well, that's a personal invitation to us. Not everyone else gets that.
Oh, just making that clear. We may well take you up on it. Thank you, Bruce, so much indeed. Sure. Thank you.
All right. Bless you guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.